These Siamese twins were humiliated by their own father and called monsters. But little did he know that a millionaire was watching it all from inside his luxury car. The millionaire gets out of his car, furious upon seeing this, and says, "I'll pay $10 million for them to be my daughters. Comment on what you think will happen and subscribe to my channel to support my work." The shout echoed through the quiet street on that cold August morning, tearing through the neighborhood's tranquility like a sharp knife. "You're freaks!" a raging man yelled, dragging two little girls by the arm with such force that their feet barely touched the ground. The children, joined at the torso like Siamese twins, tried in vain to keep up with their father's long strides, while thick tears streamed down their bruised faces. The residents of the working-class neighborhood pretended not to see the scene unfolding in front of the small auto repair shop. Some closed their curtains, others crossed the street, but everyone was well aware of the routine of shouts and violence that repeated itself almost daily. The 6-year-old girls, whose names no one seemed to know for sure, were known only as the freak show kids from the auto shop. "I told you not to stand by the window. Do you want everyone staring at you? Isn't the shame you put me through enough?" "Already?" the man barked, his breath heavy with alcohol mixing with the smell of burning rubber emanating from his dirty clothes. The girls tried to balance themselves, supporting each other as best they could, their tattered dresses swaying in the cold morning wind. Tony, the girl's father, was a bitter man who saw in his Siamese daughters the reflection of all his failures. Since his wife had mysteriously disappeared months after giving birth, he had plunged into a spiral of bitterness and resentment. The shop, once prosperous, could now barely stay afloat, and the bills only piled up on the table of the small house in the back of the establishment. "Why can't you be normal? Why did I have to carry this cross?" he shouted, shaking the girls. Even harder, the one on the right, more frail and pale, sobbed softly, while the one on the left kept her eyes fixed on the ground, as if she wanted to disappear from there. Across the street, a black and luxurious car was discreetly parked. Its sole occupant, a man in an impeccable suit sitting in the back seat, watched the scene with an enigmatic expression. Edward Santos, as stated on his documents, had not planned to be there that morning. His driver had identified a problem with the car during the trip, and that was the only repair shop for miles. The girl's silent tears reflected the faint winter sunlight, creating a glimmer that caught Edward's attention. There was something in that contained suffering that instantly transported him to his own painful memories. The loss of his sister in childhood, the failed marriage, the impossibility of having children. His fingers unconsciously tightened on the fine fabric of the Italian suit. "Get inside now, you aberrations!" Tony roared, pushing the girls towards the door of the shop. It was at that moment that something inside Edward broke. Without thinking about the consequences, he opened the car door and got out, his expensive shoes touching the uneven asphalt of the street. "How much?" His deep voice cut through the air like thunder, making Tony turn around abruptly. The girls also stopped, their eyes wide, fixed on the stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. "What?" Tony replied, confused and annoyed by the interruption. "How much do you want for them?" Edward repeated, his voice now firmer, his eyes never leaving the two small, trembling figures in front of him. Tony let out a harsh laugh, which sounded more like a growl. "Are you kidding me? You want to buy my daughters? Who do you think you are?" Edward took 2 steps forward, his imposing presence making Tony instinctively recoil. "10 million, he said simply, as if commenting on the weather. $10 million for them to be my daughters." The silence that followed was deafening. The girls had stopped crying, their eyes alternating between their father and the mysterious stranger. Tony opened and closed his mouth several times, like a fish out of water, unable to process what he had just heard. "That's insane," he finally murmured. But his eyes were already shining with a different light, the light of greed. "You can't I can and I will," Edward interrupted. "I will do everything legally. You will have your money, and they will have a decent life." The girls squeezed against each other, trembling not only from cold, but from fear of the unknown that presented itself before them. The frailer one hid her face in her sister's shoulder, while the other kept her eyes fixed on Edward, as if trying to read his soul. At that moment, none of those present could imagine that this seemingly absurd proposal would be just the beginning of a journey that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. A journey of pain, discoveries, and perhaps redemption. Tony looked at his daughters, then at the well-dressed man in front of him, and finally at the decaying shop that could barely keep him alive. His answer, although not yet verbalized, was already written in his greedy eyes. 10 million, he murmured, savoring each syllable as if they were drops of honey. "And how do I know you have all that money?" Edward removed a card from the inside pocket of his suit jacket and extended it to Tony. The moment his grease-stained fingers touched the fine paper would mark the beginning of a transformation that no one could predict. The girls, still huddled together and trembling, did not know that their lives were about to change drastically, for better or for worse. The lawyer's office seemed too small to contain all the tension that hung in the air. The smell of stale coffee mixed with the mold of the files stacked on the shelves, while Tony fidgeted restlessly in the plastic chair. His calloused hands kept folding and unfolding the card that Edward had given him the previous morning. Across the worn formica table, Dr. Paul adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses, analyzing the documents with an unreadable expression. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Tony?" the lawyer asked for the third time, his gaze alternating between the papers and the agitated client in front of him. "To give up custody of the girls like this—" 10 million, Doc," Tony interrupted, leaning forward. "The man has 10 million. Do you have any idea what that is? What it costs to raise 2 kids? Like that? The medicines, the consultations, everything they need." The lawyer sighed, removing his glasses to clean them with a handkerchief already yellowed with age. In his 30 years of profession in that small neighborhood office, he had never encountered a situation like that. "And the girls? Have you talked to them about this?" Tony's harsh laugh sounded like sandpaper against wood. "Talk? They barely talk. They only know how to cry and hide. That man can give them a decent life, better than staying with me, right?" In the small house behind the repair shop, the girls were sitting on their thin mattress on the floor, their backs against the peeling wall. Leah, the frailer one, mechanically braided her sister Sophie's hair, as she did every morning. It was their comfort ritual, one of the few things that gave them some sense of normalcy. "Do you think he'll separate us?" Leah whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she intertwined the dark strands. Sophie, always the stronger of the two, held her sister's hand. "No one can separate us. We are one, remember? Mom always said that." The mention of their mother brought tears to both of their eyes. Memories of her were like faded photographs, a gentle smile, soft hands that embraced them without fear or disgust, a soft voice singing lullabies. And then, one day, she simply disappeared, leaving only the echo of her last words. "Mommy will be back soon, my flowers." The creaking of the front door made them shrink back instinctively. Their father's heavy footsteps echoed through the house, accompanied by unfamiliar voices. Sophie pulled the tattered blanket over them, as if the thin fabric could protect them from what was to come. "They're in here," Tony's deep voice sounded closer. "I don't have much, but that will change," replied a voice that the girls recognized as belonging to the man from the black car. "From today on, they will have everything they need." The bedroom door opened with a sharp groan. The light from the hallway cast 3 elongated shadows on the cement floor, Tony, Edward, and a woman they had never seen before. "Those are them," Tony said without entering the room. "Leah and Sophie. The one on the right is Leah, the quieter one." The other one is Sophie. Edward took a step forward, kneeling at a respectful distance. His expensive suit contrasted grotesquely with the poverty of the environment. "Hello, girls. I'm Edward. This is Marlene. She will help take care of you." The woman next to him offered a gentle smile. She was a middle-aged lady with grey hair tied in a discreet bun and kind eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. "How beautiful you are," she said, her voice as soft as velvet. Leah hid her face in her sister's shoulder, while Sophie kept her eyes fixed on the strangers, her small body tense like a violin string about to snap. "Would you like to see your new house?" Edward asked, keeping his voice calm and low, as if talking to frightened birds. "There is a special room waiting for you, with toys and books. We don't want to go." Sophie's voice came out shaky but firm. "This is our home." A heavy silence filled the room. Tony took a step forward, his face red with contained anger. "There's no discussion. You're going, period." The girls cowered even more, and Edward raised a hand in a pacifying gesture. "It doesn't have to be like this," he said before turning again to the girls. "I promise that no one will hurt you. Never again." It was Leah who reacted first, her gaze meeting Edward's for a brief moment. There was something in those eyes, an ancient sadness, a familiar loneliness, that made her hesitate. "Can we take our doll?" she asked, her voice so low that it could barely be heard. Edward felt his heart clench as he saw the doll, a piece of cloth tied with string, stained and worn out by time. "Of course you can. You can take everything you want." Marlene approached with a small suitcase. "Let's pack your things together. Can you show me what is important to you?" The girls exchanged glances, years of silent communication passing between them in a single look. Finally, Sophie nodded slightly. While Marlene helped the girls pack their few belongings, Edward went out to the hallway, where Tony waited impatiently. "The first deposit is already in your account," he said, his voice loaded with a contempt he could barely contain. "But remember the agreement. You can't look for them. Never again." Tony shoved his hands in his pockets, avoiding the other man's accusing gaze. "I already signed the papers, didn't I? They're yours now. Just take good care of them." From the room came the soft sound of Leah's crying, quickly muffled by Sophie. Edward closed his eyes for a moment, wondering if he was doing the right thing. The image of his younger sister, dead so young and alone, flashed in his mind. No, he would not allow these girls to suffer the same fate. No matter the cost, he would give them the life they deserved. Marlene emerged from the room with the girls, each holding one end of the small suitcase. Their faces were washed and their hair combed, but their eyes carried a weight that no child should know. "We're ready," Marlene said softly. The girls passed by their father without looking at him, as if they had already learned that expecting any demonstration of affection would only bring more pain. Tony remained motionless, his eyes fixed on an invisible point on the wall. When they reached the front door, Sophie stopped abruptly, causing Leah to stumble. "Wait," she said, turning to look one last time at the house that, despite everything, was the only home they knew. "Mommy, she won't know where to find us." Edward felt his insides twist. Marlene knelt beside the girls, taking their hands in hers. "Sweethearts, sometimes mothers, they find a way to find us no matter where we are." The black car waited on the street, its beige leather interior seeming like another world to the girls. When the doors closed with a soft click, Leah began to tremble uncontrollably. Sophie hugged her as best she could, her own fears hidden beneath a mask of courage. The driver started the car, and the wheels began to move on the uneven asphalt. Through the tinted glass, the girls saw their house, the auto shop, and their father left behind, diminishing until they became just indistinct points in the urban landscape. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked, her voice small in the silence. Of the car, Edward turned around in the front seat, offering what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Home, our home now." The words hung in the air like a promise, or perhaps a threat. The girls hugged each other tighter, their silent tears wetting the fine fabric of their dresses. The future that awaited them was as uncertain as the cloudy sky above their heads, and all they had was each other. The mansion emerged from the trees like an apparition, its white walls reflecting the faint light of dusk. For Leah and Sophie, accustomed to the tight confines of their old room, the building seemed too big, too scary. The car glided smoothly through the circular driveway, stopping in front of a marble staircase. "We're here," Edward announced, his gentle voice cutting through the silence that had dominated the trip. The girls didn't move, their hands intertwined so tightly that their knuckles were white. Marlene was the first to get out of the car, opening the door for them with an encouraging smile. "Shall we go see your new room? I'm sure you'll love it." The interior of the house was even more impressive. Leah and Sophie walked with hesitant steps on the polished wooden floor, their worn shoes seeming to profane that immaculate environment. An immense crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, creating small rainbows on the light walls. "This way," Edward called, guiding them through a wide corridor decorated with paintings in soft tones. He stopped in front of a double door of carved wood, and with a theatrical gesture, opened it. The room was a pink dream. A specially adapted king-size bed dominated the center of the room, covered with a soft comforter printed with delicate flowers. Shelves filled with books and new toys covered one of the walls, while the other housed an immense closet with mirrored doors. "Is it for us?" Leah whispered, her wide eyes reflecting disbelief. "All yours," Edward confirmed. "Feel free to explore." But the girls remained standing at the entrance as if fearing that everything would disappear if they dared to touch anything. Sophie clutched the battered suitcase to her chest, the only familiar object in that strange world. "How about a hot bath first?" Marlene suggested, noticing the girls' discomfort. "Then we can have something yummy for dinner." The bathroom attached to the room was bigger than their entire old house. The tub, deep and spacious, was soon filled with warm water and scented foam. Marlene helped the girls with infinite patience, treating their condition with naturalness as she washed them and detangled their hair. It was during the bath that the first crack appeared in Sophie's facade of courage. "He'll give us back," she murmured as Marlene rinsed her hair, "when he gets tired of us, just like Dad." Leah began to cry silently, her tears mixing with the bath water. Marlene felt her heart clench. "Mr. Edward isn't like that," she said softly. "He chose you. He wanted you from the first moment." "Why?" Sophie asked, her voice full of distrust. "No one has ever wanted us before." The question went unanswered, hanging in the humid air of the bathroom like a storm cloud. After the bath, dressed in soft, new pajamas, the girls sat on the edge of the giant bed, looking even smaller in the midst of so much space. Dinner was served right there: creamy soup, fresh bread, and orange juice. They ate slowly, as if each bite could be their last. Edward appeared later, knocking gently on the door before entering. He was carrying a medium-sized box. "I brought something for you," he said, sitting in an armchair next to the bed. "You can open it." Inside the box were two identical teddy bears, soft and new, with pink ribbon bows around their necks. The girls looked at the toys without moving. "Don't you like them?" Edward asked, a note of concern in his voice. "They're very pretty," Leah replied softly. But what, honey? How much do we have to pay?" Sophie completed, her voice trembling slightly. Edward felt like he had been punched in the stomach. "Pay? No, girls, you don't have to pay for anything. They're gifts." "But Dad always said everything has a price," Sophie insisted, "that nothing is free." Edward stood up abruptly, turning to the window so the girls wouldn't see the anger in his eyes. He took a few deep breaths before turning back to them. "It's different here," he said, choosing his words carefully. "You don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to do anything to deserve things. You're my daughters now, and I want to take care of you." "For how long?" Leah's question came out almost inaudibly. "Forever," he replied, without hesitation. "I promise." The girls exchanged glances, years of broken promises weighing on their small shoulders. Edward realized that words would not be enough. He would have to prove with actions, day after day, that this promise was different. Marlene returned to help them settle in for the night. The bed was so soft that they seemed to sink into it, as if floating on a cloud. Even so, they slept huddled together in the center of the immense mattress, as they always did on their old mattress on the floor. Edward watched from the door as Marlene covered them up. In their sleep, their faces finally seemed at peace, free from the masks of fear and distrust they wore awake. "They'll adapt," Marlene whispered, joining him in the hallway. "They just need time and patience and love," Edward completed, gently closing the door. "A lot of love." Later, alone in his office, Edward held an old photograph. In it, a girl of about 10 years old smiled at the camera, her bright eyes full of life. His sister, Marina, who died at the age of 12, in an accident that he never forgave himself for not preventing. "Help me do this right," he murmured to the photo. "Help me give them what you didn't have a chance to have." The silence of the night was his only answer. In the girls' room, Leah woke up startled, disoriented by the unfamiliar darkness. For a moment of panic, she didn't recognize where she was. Then she felt Sophie's familiar embrace and relaxed a little. "Shh," Sophie whispered, even though no one else could hear them. "We're together, always together." "Do you think Mommy will find us here?" Leah asked, her voice choked. Sophie didn't answer immediately. Through the large window, the moon cast its silver light over the strange room, transforming shadows into imaginary monsters. "I don't know," she said finally, "but now we have a real bed and food, and there's no yelling." It was true. The silence of the mansion was different from the tense silence of their old home. There was no constant fear of heavy footsteps in the hallway, of doors slamming, of screams tearing through the night. Still, the fear persisted. A different, deeper fear. The fear that all this was temporary, that they would wake up back on their mattress on the floor, that this new life was just a cruel dream. With these thoughts, the girls fell back asleep, their small bodies seeking comfort in each other, as they had always done since they could remember. Outside, the night went on, indifferent to the dramas unfolding under its starry cloak. The first week at the mansion passed like a hazy dream for Leah and Sophie. Each morning brought new discoveries, some wonderful, others frightening. Breakfast, served promptly at 8 o'clock, was a feast of colors and flavors that they barely dared to touch. Seated at the immense dining table, they looked like two dolls lost in the midst of fine china and gleaming silverware. "You can eat as much as you want," Marlene repeated every morning, her heart clenching as she saw how slowly the girls ate, storing pieces of bread in their pajama pockets, as if fearing that the next meal wouldn't come. Edward watched everything, with a mixture of concern and determination. During that first week, he reorganized his entire routine to be present at home. He cancelled trips, transferred meetings to video conferences, all so that the girls would know he was there, that he wouldn't disappear. But adaptation was far from easy. On the third night, a nightmare made Leah scream so loud that it woke up the whole house. When Edward and Marlene rushed to the room, they found the two girls hiding under the bed, trembling. It was just a bad dream. Marlene tried to calm them, kneeling to look under the bed. "He's going to hit us," Leah sobbed, "for making noise." Edward felt his eyes burn. "No one is going to hit you. he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Never again. I promise." It took almost an hour to convince them to come out of their hiding place. When they finally emerged, their little faces stained with tears and dust, Edward made a decision. The next morning, a middle-aged woman arrived at the mansion. Dr. Ivana introduced herself as a child psychologist, her kind eyes conveying a calmness that seemed to reach even Sophie, always so distrustful. "Can we talk for a little bit?" she asked the girls, sitting on the rug in the room. "I heard you have a special doll." Leah looked at Sophie, seeking approval, before taking the little cloth doll hidden under the pillow. It was the only thing they had brought from the old house, besides their worn clothes. "Mom made it," Leah explained softly, her fingers stroking the worn fabric. Before she left, Ivana noticed how the girls tensed at the mention of their mother. "Do you miss her?" Sophie hugged her sister protectively. "She said she would come back," she replied bitterly, "but she lied, just like everyone else." The psychologist did not argue, she just listened as the girls, little by little, let out fragments of their memories. The mother singing them to sleep, the father breaking bottles in the kitchen, the neighbors pretending not to see them when they passed on the street. Edward, watching the session through the security cameras in his office, felt his heart break with each revelation. The extent of the girl's trauma was greater than he imagined. "We need to take it slow," Ivana explained later, meeting with him and Marlene. "They have developed very strong defense mechanisms. Any sudden change can cause regression." "How long until they feel safe?" Edward asked anxiously. "There is no deadline," she replied softly. "Each child has their own time. And in their case, being Siamese twins, there is a whole dynamic of their own that we need to respect." The following days brought small progress and great challenges. One morning, Marlene found all the new toys destroyed, scattered across the floor of the room. Sophie admitted to being responsible. "We don't need toys," she declared, chin raised in defiance. "We don't need any of this." Edward took a deep breath, controlling his frustration. "Why did you do that, Sophie?" "Because," her voice failed, tears beginning to well up, "because it's all a lie. You're just pretending to be nice, just like everyone else." It was Leah who surprised everyone, speaking with unusual clarity. "She's scared. We both are." The silence that followed was heavy. Edward knelt in front of the girls, ignoring how his expensive suit touched the floor, covered with destroyed plush. "What are you afraid of?" he asked softly. "Of liking it," Leah replied while Sophie sobbed silently. "Of liking it and then losing everything again." That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He stayed in his office, reviewing old photographs and documents. Among them, he found the record of the disappearance of the girl's mother, Helena Santos. He had searched for her discreetly since bringing the girls home, but it was as if the woman had evaporated into thin air. The police report was frustrating in its simplicity. 28-year-old woman, last seen leaving her house on a March morning. 5 years ago, no leads, no witnesses. The case was closed after 6 months of fruitless investigation. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Marlene, carrying a cup of tea. "They finally fell asleep," she informed, placing the cup on the table. But Sophie cried until she drifted off. Edward rubbed his tired eyes. "Am I doing the right thing, Marlene? What if I'm just making everything worse?" The housekeeper sat in the chair in front of the table, something she rarely did. "You know what I saw today while cleaning up the destroyed toys?" Leah kept a small bear hidden under her pillow. It was intact. "And do you know why?" Edward shook his head, curious. "Because Sophie couldn't destroy it. She tried, but she couldn't. Because it was the first gift you gave them. That means something, Mr. Edward. It means that even with all the fear, they are already starting to become attached." In the girls' room, Leah woke up in the middle of the night, as she always did. But this time, instead of the usual fear, she felt something different. The room was lit by the soft light of a star-shaped nightlight, a gift from Marlene after discovering her. Fear of the dark. Next to her, Sophie slept restlessly, mumbling unintelligible words. Leah stroked her hair, as her mother used to do when they were younger. Her gaze wandered around the room, stopping at the destroyed toys that Marlene had carefully piled in. A corner. Carefully, not to wake her sister, she reached out and picked up the small bear she had hidden. Its soft fur glowed under the soft light of the nightlight. It was the first time she had something truly hers, something she didn't have, to share even with Sophie. "Sorry," she whispered to the bear, as if it could understand. "Sophie didn't mean to hurt you. She's just scared." A movement at the door caught her attention. For a moment her heart leaped with fear, but it was just Edward, standing silently, in the hallway. Their eyes met, and for the first time Leah didn't look away. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly, entering the room. Leah shook her head, still hugging the bear. "Me neither," Edward confessed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Want me to tell you a story?" Another negative nod. Can you just stay here for a little while?" Edward felt his heart swell. "Sure," he replied, settling more comfortably on the bed. "I'll stay here as long as you want." And so they stayed, in comfortable silence, until Leah finally fell asleep. The bear still clutched in her arms. Edward remained there, watching over the sleep of the two girls, his heart divided between hope and fear. Fear of failing, of not being enough, of not being able to heal such deep wounds. But that night, under the soft light of the star-shaped nightlight, something changed. A small crack appeared in the wall of distrust that the girls had built around them. It was only the beginning, he knew. But it was a beginning. The arrival of autumn brought subtle changes to the mansion. The leaves of the trees in the garden began to turn golden, and the colder air made the nights longer. Inside the house, other transformations, equally delicate, were also happening. It had been almost a month since the girls had arrived, and small signs of progress could be noted. Breakfast was no longer a moment of absolute tension. Leah had even asked for a second serving of oatmeal the day before, to everyone's surprise and joy. On that particular morning, Edward watched the girls through the window of his office. They were in the garden with Ivana, sitting on a blanket spread out on the grass. The psychologist had suggested outdoor sessions, arguing that the less formal environment could help them express themselves better. "Shall we draw today?" Ivana proposed, spreading sheets of paper and colored pencils on the blanket. Sophie, as always, was the first to respond. "We don't know how to draw right." "There's no right or wrong way to draw," Ivana smiled. "Just let your heart guide your hand." Leah timidly picked up a red pencil, and Sophie, after a moment of hesitation, chose a blue one. It was fascinating to observe how they moved in perfect synchrony, even when doing different activities. "You can draw whatever you want," Ivana continued. "Something you like or something that scares you. Sometimes it's easier to show than to tell." The minutes passed in concentrated silence. Edward, still watching from the window, noticed Marlene discreetly approaching with a tray of cookies and juice. The housekeeper had become an indispensable presence in the girls' lives, offering a type of maternal affection they clearly craved. "I'm done," Leah announced softly after almost half an hour. Her drawing showed a solitary figure dressed in red, surrounded by what appeared to be dark clouds. In the corner of the paper, almost hidden, was a small yellow star. "Can you tell me about your drawing?" Ivana asked gently. "It's Mommy," Leah replied, her voice trembling slightly. "She's lost in the dark clouds, but there's a star to help her find her way back." Sophie dropped her own pencil abruptly, and Edward saw Ivana make a quick note in her notebook. "And do you still hope she comes back?" the psychologist asked softly. Sometimes, Leah confessed, when I wake up at night, I keep imagining her walking through the door, smiling like before. She's not coming back, Sophie's voice came out sharply. Just like Dad isn't coming back, just like no one ever stays. Edward will stay, Leah said, surprising everyone, including herself. The silence that followed was heavy. Edward in his office felt his heart clench. It was the first time Leah had expressed any kind of confidence in his permanence. Why do you think that? Ivana asked, maintaining a neutral tone. Because, Leah hesitated, searching for the words. Because he doesn't yell. And because he stays in the room until we fall asleep even when he's tired. Sophie picked up her own drawing, crumpling it into a ball. It doesn't matter. Everyone always leaves in the end. Can I see your drawing before you throw it away? Ivana asked. After a moment of resistance, Sophie partially uncrumpled the paper. The drawing showed two figures holding hands, surrounded by a kind of fence or wall. Are those you two? The psychologist asked. Sophie nodded reluctantly. It's so no one else gets close, so no one else hurts us. Edward couldn't continue watching. He turned away from the window and sat heavily in his chair. The weight of the responsibility he had assumed seemed even greater now. How could he prove to these girls that not everyone leaves, that not all love is conditional? A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Regina, his secretary, with a worried expression on her face. Mr. Edward, there's a call from Dr. Paul, the lawyer. He says it's urgent. Edward picked up the phone with a bad feeling. The lawyer's voice on the other end of the line confirmed his fears. Mr. Edward, we have a problem. Tony was here earlier today. He wants more money. What do you mean, more money? The agreement. He's threatening to contest the custody, the lawyer interrupted. He says he wasn't in his right mind when he signed the papers, that he was coerced. Edward felt a wave of anger rise through his neck. He can't do that. We have documents, witnesses. Technically, he can try, Dr. Paul explained. Not that he'll succeed, but he can cause disruptions, delay the final adoption process. Through the window, Edward could still see the girls in the garden. Now they were helping Marlene collect the drawing materials, and there was something so fragile, so precious in that scene that made his heart ache. How much does he want? He asked through gritted teeth. 5 million. He says it's the price of his silence. Edward closed his eyes, trying to control his anger. Take care of it, Paul. I don't want him anywhere near the girls. After hanging up, he remained a long time looking out the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in orange tones. In the garden, Ivana said goodbye to the girls with a careful hug. That's when he noticed something different. Leah had kept her drawing, instead of discarding it as she normally did. It was a small gesture, but a significant one. She was keeping something for the first time, allowing herself to have a memory, create a story. The night arrived silently at the mansion. During dinner, Edward observed how the girls seemed quieter than normal. Sophie barely touched her food, and Leah kept her eyes fixed on her plate. Did something happen today? He asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Leah is sick, Sophie replied abruptly. Edward felt his heart skip a beat. What do you mean, sick? She has a headache, Sophie explained, but she didn't want to say anything because she's afraid you'll get angry and send us away. Edward's fork clattered against the plate when he dropped it. Girls, look at me, he asked softly. He waited until both of them raised their eyes. You never need to be afraid to tell me when you're not feeling well. I would never send you away for being sick. Dad did, Leah murmured. He said it was just an excuse. Edward took a deep breath, controlling the anger he felt every time he heard about the treatment the girls had received. Well, I'm not your dad. I mean, I am now, and I do things differently. Marlene, who was watching the scene from the kitchen door, approached with a glass of water and a headache pill. "I'll make some chamomile tea too," she offered with a gentle smile. Later, after putting the girls to bed, Edward found Leah's drawing on the nightstand. The small yellow star shone lonely in the corner of the paper like a promise of hope. He sat in the armchair next to the bed, as he did every night, watching the girls fall asleep. Sophie, as always, kept a protective arm over her sister even during sleep. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he whispered in the darkness of the room. "Never again." It was a promise he intended to keep at any cost, even if it meant facing Tony, the justice system, or any other obstacle that came his way. Because now he understood that he had not chosen these girls just to save them. They were also in some mysterious way saving him. Leah's headache didn't go away the next day, nor the day after. On the third day of persistent fever, Edward decided to call a doctor to the mansion, fearing that the trip to the hospital could further stress the girls. Dr. Ricardo was a middle-aged pediatrician with grey hair and gold-rimmed glasses that gave him a paternal air. Even so, when he entered the room, Sophie instinctively placed herself in front of her sister. "You don't need to be afraid," the doctor said softly, maintaining a respectful distance. "I just want to help your sister feel better." "The last time a doctor said that," Sophie replied bitterly, "he hurt us." Edward, who was watching from the door, felt his stomach churn. How many traumas were still hidden in the memories of these children? It took almost an hour of gentle conversation, with the help of Marlene and Ivana, called in urgently, for the girls to allow the examination. Dr. Ricardo worked with infinite patience, explaining each movement before making it. "It's stress," he finally concluded, meeting with Edward in his office. "Her body is reacting to all the changes, all the trauma. It's common in children who have gone through difficult situations." "And what can we do?" Edward asked, the concern evident in his voice. "Besides the medications I prescribed, they need stability, routine, security." And he added, looking significantly at Edward, "They need to know that they are not alone." That night, while Leah slept restlessly under the effect of the medications, Edward found Sophie sitting on the bathroom floor, crying silently. "Hey," he called softly, sitting next to her on the cold floor. "Want to talk?" "It's my fault," she sobbed. "Leah always gets sick when I mess up." "What mess up?" "The drawing. I shouldn't have said those things about Mom. Now Leah is sad again." Edward felt his heart clench. "Sophie, look at me," he asked gently. He waited until she raised her tearful eyes. "It's not your fault. You have the right to feel anger, sadness, all the feelings that are inside you. You don't need to be strong all the time." "But I need to protect her," Sophie insisted. "I promised Mom before she left." It was the first time one of the girls had voluntarily mentioned a conversation with her mother. Edward chose his next words carefully. "Can you tell me about that promise?" Sophie hugged her knees, making herself even smaller. "It was on the last night. Mom came into our room really late. She was crying. She kissed us and said she needed to solve something important, that she would be back soon. She asked me to take care of Leah because she's more sensitive." Her voice failed. "I promised, but I couldn't protect her from Dad. And now she's sick. Again!" Edward fought against the lump in his throat. "You were just a child, Sophie. You still are. It wasn't your responsibility to protect anyone. Then why did she ask?" The question came out like a muffled scream. "Sometimes," Edward began, choosing his words carefully, "adults make mistakes. Your mother shouldn't have put that weight on you. And now you don't need to carry that alone anymore. I'm here. Marlene is here. Ivana is here. We all want to help you too." Sophie looked at him for a long time, as if trying to find some sign of a lie in his words. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why do you care?" Edward felt tears form in his own eyes. Because from the moment I saw you on that street, something inside me changed. Because you deserve to be loved, protected, cared for. And because... His voice faltered for a moment. Because I also know what it's like to lose someone you love and feel responsible for it. In the room, Leah began to cry in her sleep. Sophie stood up instantly, but Edward gently stopped her. "Let me go," he said. "You need to rest too." For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Sophie didn't protest. Edward found Leah restless in bed, mumbling incomprehensible words. He sat next to her and began to stroke her hair, as he had seen Marlene do. "Mommy," she called, without opening her eyes. Edward hesitated for a moment. "No, honey, it's me, Edward." Leah opened her eyes slowly, the fever making her gaze hazy. "Sorry," she murmured. "For what?" "For calling for Mommy. I know you want to be our dad now." Edward felt his heart break. "Leah, you never need to apologize for missing your mother. That doesn't diminish in anything what we are building here." "But what if she comes back one day?" The question came out almost inaudibly. "Are you going to send us away?" "Never," Edward replied firmly. "If your mother comes back one day, we'll figure out how to deal with it together. But you will always have a place here. You will always be my daughters." Leah closed her eyes again, a solitary tear running down her feverish cheek. "Promise." "I promise," he replied, continuing to stroke her hair until she fell back asleep. In the hallway, Marlene waited with a tray containing tea and cold compresses. Her eyes were teary. She'd heard the whole conversation. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly, entering the room to change the compress on Leah's forehead. Edward watched the housekeeper take care of the girls with maternal love. It was amazing how, in such a short time, these two wounded children had created an unlikely family around them. But the threat of Tony hung like a dark cloud on the horizon. Edward knew he needed to act fast to protect this fragile happiness they were beginning to build. The next morning, while the girls were still asleep, he made an important call. "Dr. Paul, I need you to speed up the adoption process, no matter the cost, no matter what you need to do. Those girls are my daughters, and no one is going to take them away from me." On the other end of the line, the lawyer sighed. "Edward, I need to tell you something. I found something about Helena, the girl's mother, something that could complicate everything." Edward felt his heart freeze. "What did you find?" "She didn't disappear willingly," the lawyer said gravely. "I found records that suggest Tony may have done something to her." The silence that followed was deafening. Upstairs, Edward could hear the soft sound of the girls waking up, their voices mixed with Marlene's. Sounds of a normal morning, of a family preparing for another day, sounds that he was determined to protect, no matter the cost. The revelation about Helena tormented Edward for days. Every time he looked at the girls, he imagined the terror their mother must have lived through, and his heart ached thinking about how much suffering that family had already endured. On a particularly cold autumn afternoon, while watching Leah and Sophie playing in the garden with Marlene, Leah already recovered from her fever, his phone rang. It was Dr. Paul again. "I got more information," the lawyer said, his voice tense. "I talked to an old neighbor of Tony's, Mrs. Davis. She kept this to herself for years, fearing retaliation, but now she wants to talk." Edward closed the office door, his heart beating fast. What does she know? On the night Helena disappeared, Mrs. Davis heard a violent argument. She said it was common, but this time it was different. There were shouts, the sound of things breaking, and then silence. The lawyer paused heavily. The next morning, she saw Tony leaving very early with the car full of black bags. When he came back, he was alone. Helena was never seen again. The phone almost slipped from Edward's sweaty hands. My God, "We don't have concrete evidence," Dr. Paul interrupted, "but Mrs. Davis is willing to testify. She said she can't carry this secret anymore, especially now that she knows the girls are safe." In the garden, the girls' laughter echoed through the window. It was the first time Edward had heard them laugh like that, freely and carefree. Marlene had managed to convince them to help plant flowers, daisies and violets that colored a small, newly prepared flower bed. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice choked. "Legally, this can speed up the adoption process," the lawyer explained. "If we can prove that Tony is involved in Helena's disappearance, he automatically loses any rights to the girls. But the girls need to know the truth, Edward. Not now. Not in this blunt way, but eventually. They have the right to know what happened to their mother." The weight of that truth seemed to crush his chest. How to tell those children who had already suffered so much that their own father might have... No, he couldn't even complete the thought. A sudden scream from the garden made him run to the window, alarmed, but it was just Sophie, who had gotten dirty with soil while trying to plant a particularly stubborn seedling. To his surprise, instead of the usual panic at the sight of dirt, she was laughing. Really laughing, with Leah and Marlene joining her. "I'll need a few days," he finally said to the lawyer. "I need to talk to Dr. Ivana, find the best way." A knock on the door interrupted him. It was Regina, his secretary, with an alarmed expression. "Mr. Edward, I'm sorry to interrupt, but he's here." "He who?" "Tony. He's at the gate demanding to see the girls." The world seemed to freeze for a moment. Through the window, Edward saw the exact instant when the girls also realized their father's presence. Sophie was the first, her entire body tensed, like a cornered animal. Leah began to tremble visibly. "Paul, I need to hang up," he said quickly. "He's here. Don't let him in," the lawyer warned. "I'm coming there right now." Marlene had already realized the danger. With a calmness that only years of experience can give, she gently led the girls inside the house. "Shall we make hot chocolate?" she suggested, her firm voice masking her concern. "It's a perfect day for it." Edward ran down the stairs quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. Through the intercom, he could see Tony at the main gate, visibly agitated, yelling at the security guard. "I want to see my daughters. You have no right to stop me." "Mr. Edward," Marlene called softly from the top of the stairs. "The girls." He turned around, and his heart almost stopped. Leah was having a panic attack, her small body trembling violently while she tried to breathe. Sophie, at her side, seemed divided between terror and the need to protect her sister. "He's going to take us back," Leah whispered between desperate sobs. "He's going to hurt us again." Edward ran up the stairs, two at a time, kneeling in front of the girls. "Look at me," he asked with soft firmness. "No one is going to take you. No one is going to hurt you. I promise." Tony's shouts were getting louder. "I'm going to call the cops. They are my daughters." Sophie grabbed Edward's hand with surprising force. "Don't let him in," she begged, silent tears running down her face. "Please." It was at that moment that something inside Edward changed. A crystal-clear certainty took hold of him. These were his daughters now, and he would die before letting anyone hurt them again. "Regina," he called, his voice calm but loaded with authority. "Call security. No one enters this house. And call the police. I want to file a restraining order." Marlene had already taken the girls to their room, the place where they felt safest. Edward could hear Leah's muffled crying and the housekeeper's soft voice trying to calm her down. His phone vibrated. A message from Dr. Paul. "I'm on my way with the police. Mrs. Davis agreed to testify right now. Keep him there." Edward looked out the window of the hallway. Tony was still shouting, but now there was something different. In his eyes, it wasn't just anger anymore. There was fear too, as if he knew his time was running out. In the girls' room, Sophie had managed to calm her sister down a little, murmuring sweet words in her ear while stroking her hair, exactly as her mother used to do. The scene broke Edward's heart. "He's not going to hurt you anymore," he promised. Again, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Never again." It was Leah who asked, her voice still trembling, "How do you know?" Edward hesitated. How to explain to two 6-year-old children that their biological father could be responsible for their mother's disappearance? How to protect them from this terrible truth without lying to them? "Because now you have me," he replied finally, "and I have proof. Proof that will ensure he can never get close to you again." "What proof?" Sophie asked, her dark eyes fixed on him with a disturbing intensity. Before Edward could answer, sirens were heard in the distance. Through the window they saw 2 police cars approaching the mansion. Tony saw them too. His face paled visibly. "It's about Mommy, isn't it?" Sophie whispered, surprising everyone. "You found out what he did to her." The silence that followed was deafening. Edward felt his heart clench even more. How did she know? What else had those little ones witnessed in that house of horrors? Outside, the police officers were already surrounding Tony. Dr. Paul had arrived with Mrs. Davis, who looked at her former neighbor with a mixture of fear and determination. In the room, protected in each other's arms, 2 little girls were beginning to understand that some truths, however painful they may be, need to come to light so that healing can begin. And on that cold autumn afternoon, as the last leaves fell, from the trees in the garden, a new page began to be written in the history of that unlikely family, built not by blood ties, but by choices of love. Mrs. Davis's testimony at the police station lasted for hours. The 70-year-old lady, with her wrinkled hands clutching a worn handkerchief, described in detail the night Helena disappeared. Each of her words was like a stab in the heart of those who listened. "She tried to run away before," revealed the elderly woman, her voice trembling. "About 2 or 3 times. But she always came back because of the girls. Tony threatened to hurt them if she didn't come back." Edward, sitting in a corner of the room, felt his stomach churn. At the mansion, Marlene had stayed with the girls, trying to keep them distracted with stories and games, but he knew that they understood more than they showed. "That night," continued Mrs. Davis, "the screams were different. Helena was screaming that she was going to report him, that she had evidence of something. I didn't quite understand what. Then I heard a loud noise, like something heavy falling. And then silence. The detective, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, made meticulous notes. "Why didn't you report it before, Mrs. Davis?" The elderly woman lowered her eyes, ashamed. "Fear. Tony had dangerous friends, and then who was going to believe an old gossiper? But when I learned that the girls were safe, that they had found a real father..." She looked at Edward with tearful eyes. "I couldn't carry that weight anymore." Meanwhile, at the mansion, something unexpected was happening. Leah, normally the quieter of the two, asked to speak to Ivana alone, or as alone as her condition allowed. The psychologist, called urgently by Marlene, found the girls in their room. Sophie tried to pretend that she was concentrated on a coloring book, but her eyes betrayed her worry. "I want to tell you something," Leah said, her voice just a whisper. "About the night Mommy disappeared." Ivana sat next to her on the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "You can tell me anything you want in your own time." "We weren't sleeping," began Leah, her fingers playing nervously with the hem of her dress. "Sophie and we heard everything." Sophie dropped the colored pencil, her face pale. "Leah, we need to tell," Leah insisted, surprising everyone with her firmness. "Mommy asked us to tell, remember? If we ever found someone we could trust." Tears began to run down Sophie's face. Ivana remained silent, giving the girls the space they needed for this painful revelation. "Mommy came into our room really late," continued Leah. "She was hurt, but she was smiling at us. She said she had gotten some pictures, some papers. I don't know exactly. She said she was going to solve everything, that we would be able to run away the next day. She kissed us." Sophie finally joined the narrative, her voice choked. "She told us to be strong, that she was going to come back to get us as soon as she delivered the papers to someone important. But then Dad arrived." Leah trembled visibly. "He was screaming a lot. Mommy told us to be quiet, not to make noise. She left the room and she never came back," Sophie completed. Ivana felt her heart clench. "Did you see anything else?" The girls exchanged glances, years of secret weighing on their small shoulders. "There was a box," Sophie said finally. "Mommy hid it under the loose board in our room before leaving. She said it was our insurance, that one day we would understand. Do you know where that box is now?" Leah nodded slowly. "We brought it. It's hidden here." Before Ivana could respond, they heard the sound of cars arriving. Edward had returned, accompanied by police officers and Dr. Paul. "Ladies," called Marlene from the door, "Edward is calling you to the living room. He has something important to talk about." The girls' hearts raced. That's how bad news always arrived in their old house, with calls to the living room, with important conversations. But when they went down the stairs, leaning on each other, they found something different. Edward wasn't angry or threatening like their father used to be. He was sitting on the couch, looking tired and sad, but his eyes conveyed love. "Come here," he called softly, opening his arms. To everyone's surprise, including their own, the girls went. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, they allowed themselves to be hugged by Edward, their small bodies trembling with restrained sobs. "He's not going to hurt you anymore," Edward said, his voice choked. "Never again. The police took him away, and he's going to have to answer for everything he did." "What about Mommy?" Leah asked, her voice muffled against Edward's chest. Edward closed his eyes, tears running down his face. How to tell two children that their mother was probably dead, that their own father was the prime suspect? It was Sophie who surprised everyone again. "We already know," she said, raising her tear-stained face. "Mommy isn't coming back, is she?" The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with pain and truths long hidden. "No, honey," Edward replied softly. "I don't think so." "But there's one thing," Leah said, straightening up. "There's one thing that Mommy left for us, something she said would help bring justice one day." The police officers, who were waiting discreetly in the hall, exchanged significant glances. Dr. Paul approached, kneeling in front of the girls. "Would you like to show us what your mother left?" The girls looked at Edward, seeking security. He nodded encouragingly. "It's okay," he assured them. "You are very brave. Your mother would be proud." Sophie stood up first, pulling Leah with her. "Come on," she said. "Let's get Mommy's box." As the girls went up the stairs with Ivana, Edward felt a mixture of emotions overwhelming him. Pain for their suffering, anger at Tony, sadness for Helena, but also a flickering hope. Because today, for the first time, the girls had really allowed him to hug them. They had trusted him, and maybe, just maybe, whatever was in that box could finally bring some peace to those two little souls who had endured so much. The girls' room was silent when they removed the loose board under the king-size bed. The contrast between the fine wooden floor and the small improvised hiding place was stark, like so many other aspects of their lives now. The box was small, about the size of a child's shoebox, wrapped carefully in a piece of fabric that Sophie recognized as part of an old dress of her mother's. Her hands trembled as they removed the wrapping, "We never opened it," whispered Leah. "Mommy said only when we found someone we trusted." Edward, kneeling next to them, felt the weight of that trust. "Do you want me to open it for you?" The girls nodded, instinctively moving closer to him. The detective and Dr. Paul watched from the door, while Ivana made discreet notes in her notebook. Carefully, Edward untied the knot in the fabric. The box was sealed with adhesive tape already yellowed with time. Inside, they found several envelopes, some loose papers, and, at the bottom, a small USB device. "It's the evidence," she talked. "About," Sophie said, her voice trembling, "of what Dad was doing wrong." The detective approached carefully, always maintaining slow and predictable movements so as not to scare the girls. "Can I take a look?" Edward looked at the girls, who nodded hesitantly. The detective took the first envelope, opened it carefully, and began to read. His face grew increasingly serious. "This is..." He stopped, looking at Dr. Paul. "We need to take this to the station immediately." "What's in there?" Edward asked, instinctively hugging the girls tighter. "Apparently," replied the detective, choosing his words carefully, "Mr. Tony was involved in illegal activities at the shop. Helena found out and gathered evidence." "What kind of activities?" Edward insisted. The detective shook his head, indicating that he didn't want to discuss the details in front of the children. But Sophie, always more perceptive than her age suggested, said that's why there was so much noise at night in the shop, and strange men arriving with different cars. Leah cowered against Edward. "Mommy used to get very nervous when that happened. She told us never to go down, never to look." The detective carefully stored all the contents of the box in an evidence bag. "This will greatly help our investigation. You were very brave to keep this for so long." When the police officers left, taking with them the box and its secrets, a heavy silence fell over the room. The girls looked exhausted, as if they had run a marathon. "Is it over now?" Leah asked, her voice small and tired. Edward hugged her tighter. "Yes, my love. It's over now." But it wasn't over, not completely. In the weeks that followed, the investigation revealed an extensive network of crimes that operated through Tony's shop. Helena had discovered everything and planned to report it, but she didn't have a chance. The search for Helena's body began discreetly, far from the girls' eyes. Edward made sure to keep them occupied and protected from any disturbing news. One morning, while having breakfast on the porch, a new habit the girls had developed, Sophie asked a question that caught everyone off guard. "Can we visit the old house? Just once?" Edward exchanged worried glances with Marlene and Ivana, who was also present. The psychologist was the first to speak. "Why do you want to go there, Sophie?" "Because..." She hesitated, holding Leah's hand. "Because there are mommies. Things there. Photos, her recipe book, the hair ribbons she used to wear. We didn't bring anything. And also," Leah added timidly, "I wanted to show Edward where we used to play hide-and-seek with her. In the backyard there was a jasmine bush." Edward felt his heart clench. Of course they missed those memories, those little pieces of their mother that had been left behind in the rush of the move. "We can go," he decided, "but I'll go first to make sure it's safe. And you'll only go if you really want to?" The girls nodded, a mixture of anxiety and relief on their faces. The next day, Edward visited the house alone first. The place had been abandoned since Tony's arrest, a layer of dust covering everything. In the small room that the girls shared, he found dozens of drawings pinned to the wall, all showing a happy family with a smiling mother and two girls holding hands. In the backyard, the jasmine bush still bloomed, wild and resilient like the girls themselves. Edward picked some flowering branches, thinking about how something so delicate could survive in the midst of so much abandonment. When he returned to pick up the girls, he brought empty boxes to store what they wanted to take. Ivana insisted on accompanying them, concerned about the emotional impact that the visit might have. The girls' reaction upon entering the old house. was surprising. Instead of the fear that Edward expected, there was a kind of silent reverence. "Mommy's perfume is still here," said Leah, taking a deep breath as she entered her mother's old room. "She always smelled like jasmine." Sophie went straight to the closet, opening the doors carefully. Inside, hanging like colorful ghosts, were Helena's dresses. The girls touched the fabric with trembling fingers. "She liked this blue one," Sophie murmured. "She said it matched the sky." Edward and Ivana watched in silence as the girls collected their memories, photos, clothes, books, small treasures that told the story of a family that was once happy. In the garden, Leah knelt near the jasmine bush. "Mommy said this flower was special," she said, "because even in winter it continued to bloom. Like you," Edward said softly. "Strong and beautiful, even in the most difficult moments." It was then that something extraordinary happened. Sophie, who was digging in the soil near the jasmine, found something buried. "There's another box here," she exclaimed, her small hands digging into the damp soil. It was a metal box, the kind used to store important documents. It was sealed with electrical tape and had the initials HS engraved on the lid. "Helena Santos," Edward murmured, his heart racing. The girls looked at him, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "Could it be? Let's take it home," he said firmly. "We'll open it calmly there." On the way back to the mansion, the girls held the box between them in the back seat of the car, as if it were the most precious object in the world. And maybe it was. Another message from their mother, another piece of the puzzle of their lives. Edward watched them through the rearview mirror, his heart heavy with the responsibility of protecting not only their bodies, but also their memories, their stories, their right to know the truth about their mother. The sun was setting when they arrived home, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. The jasmine flowers that Edward had picked perfumed the car with their sweet and nostalgic fragrance, a reminder that some things, like a mother's love, never really die. The metal box found in the garden remained on Edward's office table throughout the night. The girls had finally fallen asleep, exhausted after the emotionally draining day, but not before extracting from him the promise that they would only open the box together the next morning. Now, as the mansion slept, Edward couldn't take his eyes off that mysterious object. What else had Helena kept? What other secrets would that metal box contain? Marlene entered the office silently, bringing a cup of tea. "The girls are sleeping," she informed him softly, "but they are restless. Leah had a nightmare." "How is she now?" "Better." Sophie sang her to sleep. A song that their mother used to sing. Edward felt his heart clench. It was amazing how, even absent, Helena was still such a strong presence in the girls' lives. Her love, her songs, even her jasmine perfume, all of this had survived time and tragedy. Morning arrived with a fine drizzle that blurred the windows of the mansion. The girls came down for breakfast still in their pajamas, their eyes going immediately to the office where they knew the box awaited them. "Can we open it now?" Sophie asked, barely touching her toast with butter. Edward exchanged glances with Ivana, who had arrived early especially for this moment. The psychologist nodded slightly. "Let's go to the office," he said, rising from the table. The moment of opening the box was almost solemn. Edward placed it on his work table while the girls settled into chairs on each side of him. Ivana and Marlene remained discreetly in the back of the room. Carefully, Edward removed the electrical tape. The lid was slightly oxidized, but it yielded with a soft click. Inside, there was a large envelope, several notebooks, and, surprisingly, an old cell phone. "It was Mommy's!" exclaimed Leah, recognizing the device. She always carried it hidden from Dad. Edward picked up the envelope first. Inside, there was a letter written in a delicate but firm handwriting. "Do you want me to read it?" he asked softly. The girls nodded, instinctively moving closer to him. My dearest flowers, if you are reading this letter, it means that you have found my last hiding place and that you are finally safe enough for it. It also means that I was not able to come back to get you as I had promised. And for that, I ask forgiveness every day in my prayers. I want you to know that every moment away from you was torture, but I needed to try. I needed to do something to get you out of that life, that constant fear. Your father was not always like this. There was a time when we were happy, when he smiled when he saw you playing in the garden. But something changed. The money, the debts, the wrong people, everything was transforming him into someone I no longer recognize. When I discovered what was really happening at the shop at night, I tried to confront him. It was a mistake. He became violent like never before. That's when I realized that I needed to act, not only for myself, but mainly for you. I started gathering evidence. I took pictures, recorded conversations, copied documents. It's all stored on this phone and in the notebooks. I planned to take everything to the police, get protection for the three of us, start a new life somewhere else. But something went wrong. On the night I intended to run away with you, he found out. I don't know how, but he found out. I only had time to hide the evidence and give you a last kiss. I knew he would come after me, so I ran. I ran away, hoping he would follow me and leave you alone. My little ones, my greatest loves, forgive me for not having been strong enough. Forgive me for not having been able to protect you as a mother should. But know that every decision I made, every risk I took, was thinking about giving you a chance at a better life. Sophie, my warrior, I know that you have carried an enormous weight on your shoulders since I asked you to take care of your sister. It was not fair to place that responsibility on you, a child, but you are strong, so strong, just like the jasmine in the garden, which blooms even in the harshest winter. Leah, my dreamer, never lose that light that you have inside you, that special way of seeing beauty even on the darkest days. You remind me so much of your grandmother, with that gift of making people smile even when they are sad. If you are reading this, it is because you have found someone you can trust, someone who saw in you what I always saw. Two extraordinary girls who deserve all the love in the world. Allow yourselves to be loved. Allow yourselves to be children again. And to whoever is taking care of my daughters now, thank you. Thank you for giving them what I couldn't. Thank you for keeping them safe, for showing them that there is goodness in the world. All my love. Forever, Mommy. Edward's voice faltered on the last words. Leah cried silently, while Sophie kept her eyes fixed on the letter, as if she could absorb every word through her gaze. She didn't abandon us, Sophie whispered. She was trying to save us. Edward gently placed the letter on the table and hugged the two girls. They clung to him as if their lives depended on it, their small bodies trembling with restrained sobs. Ivana approached discreetly, picking up the cell phone. "I'll take this to the police," she said softly. "They don't need to see the content now." The notebooks, however, were different. They were Helena's personal diaries, full of happy memories with the girls. Drawings, stories, small daily achievements, a treasure of love recorded on paper. Can we keep the notebooks?" Leah asked, her voice still choked. "Of course you can," Edward replied. "They're yours. They always were." That night, after the girls finally fell asleep, their mother's notebook safe in their arms, Edward remained in his office, rereading Helena's letter. Her words of gratitude echoed in his mind. "Thank you for giving them what I couldn't. I promise to take care of them," he whispered to the paper, as if Helena could hear him. "I promise they will be loved, protected, happy. I promise that your sacrifice was not in vain." Outside, the drizzle had stopped, and the full moon illuminated the garden where, somewhere, jasmine flowers continued to bloom, resilient and beautiful, like the love of a mother that never really died. The days that followed the discovery of Helena's letter brought subtle but significant changes to the girls' behavior. It was as if an invisible weight had been removed from their small shoulders. Sophie, in particular, seemed lighter, as if her mother's absolution had freed something inside her. On a particularly sunny morning, while having coffee on the porch, a ritual they now performed without fear, Leah surprised everyone with a request. "Edward, can we plant jasmine here in the garden?" The question caught Edward off guard, but his heart warmed instantly. It was the first time Leah had made a request directly to him, without using Sophie as an intermediary. "Of course we can," he replied, smiling. "We can make a whole garden if you want." "Like Mommy's?" Sophie asked, her eyes shining with a new hope. "Even better," he promised. "We can plant all the flowers you want." That's how the garden project started. Marlene, who had knowledge of gardening, helped choose the best location, a sunny flower bed near the porch, where the girls could see the flowers from their rooms. The work in the garden became a kind of therapy for everyone. The girls, under Marlene's patient guidance, learned to prepare the soil, plant the seedlings, water just right. Edward often joined them, leaving aside his expensive suits to get his hands dirty in the soil. "Mommy used to say that flowers are like people," Leah commented one afternoon while planting a new jasmine seedling. "They need love and patience to grow strong." Edward, kneeling next to them in the soil, felt his eyes burn. It was amazing how Helena, even absent, continued teaching her daughters through small lessons of love. But not everything was flowers. One night, Edward was awakened by screams coming from the girls' room. He found Sophie in a panic, trying to calm Leah, who was thrashing in the midst of a terrible nightmare. "She's dreaming about that night again," Sophie explained, her own hands trembling. "It happens sometimes, since we read Mommy's letter." Edward sat on the edge of the bed, gently taking Leah in his arms. "It's okay, honey. You are safe. We are all here." Gradually, Leah calmed down, her sobs diminishing until they turned into regular breathing. But Sophie remained awake, her dark eyes fixed on an invisible point on the wall. "Sometimes," she said softly, "I dream that Mommy managed to escape, that she is somewhere trying to come back to us." Edward felt his heart clench. How to explain to a child that some dreams cannot come true? How to help them accept such a deep loss? It was Ivana who suggested an idea during the following session. "Why don't we create a memory ritual, a special moment to remember Helena, celebrate her love?" The suggestion resulted in a new project. The girls, with Marlene's help, began to create a memory album. They filled it with the photos found in the old house, excerpts from Helena's diaries, new drawings they made remembering. Happy moments with their mother? "Look at this one," said Leah one afternoon, showing a yellowed photograph. In it, Helena smiled radiantly, holding the two girls still babies. "It was on our first birthday. She made a chocolate cake," Sophie recalled, stroking the photo with delicate fingers. "And she sang happy birthday 3 times because we didn't want to stop clapping." Edward watched these interactions with a mixture of joy and sadness. It was painful to see how the girls had been deprived of so many moments with their mother, but at the same time, it was beautiful to see how they preserved each memory with so much love. One morning, about 2 weeks after the discovery of the letter, Dr. Paul appeared at the mansion with news about the investigation. Edward received him in the office, while the girls played in the garden under Marlene's watchful eye. "The evidence that Helena gathered is much more serious than we imagined," the lawyer explained. Tony Knott wasn't just involved in illegal businesses. There was something bigger, a network of crimes that operated through the shop. "And what about Helena?" Edward asked, fearing the answer. Paul sighed heavily. "The searches continue, but they found traces of blood in a remote area where witnesses saw Tony's car that night. The DNA is a match to hers." Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that confirmation. Although everyone already suspected Helena's fate, having the confirmation made everything more real, more painful. "How am I going to tell them this?" he murmured, more to himself than to Paul. "With the truth," the lawyer replied softly. "They are stronger than we imagine, and they have you now." Through the office window, Edward could see the girls in the garden. They were kneeling near the jasmine seedlings, chatting animatedly with Marlene about something. The morning sun formed, a golden halo around them, and for a moment Edward could have sworn he saw a third figure. There, a woman with dark hair and a gentle smile, watching her daughters with infinite love. "They have all of us," Edward corrected, wiping away a stubborn tear. "Marlene, Ivana, we have become a different family, but still a family." At that moment, as if sensing they were being watched, the girls looked up at the office window. Their smiles, still rare but increasingly frequent, illuminated their little faces in a way that made Edward's heart clench. "You know what else they found along with the traces?" Paul asked, his voice soft. A piece of paper protected in a plastic bag. It was written, "My flowers are stronger than winter. Her last message." Edward nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the first jasmine flowers were beginning to bloom, their sweet perfume floating on the morning breeze, a fragrant reminder that love, like flowers, finds ways to survive even in the most adverse conditions. The decision of how to tell the girls about the confirmation of their mother's fate consumed Edward for days. He consulted Ivana extensively, seeking the least traumatic way to approach the subject. The psychologist insisted that the truth, presented with love and care, was always the best path. "They already know deep down," Ivana explained during a meeting in her office. "Children have an extraordinary intuition. What they need now is confirmation and, above all, to know that they have permission to feel everything they are feeling." It was Sophie who inadvertently created the perfect moment for the conversation. One afternoon, while taking care of the garden, which now displayed several jasmine seedlings in different stages of growth, she made an observation that broke everyone's heart. "Do you think Mommy can see the flowers from where she is?" Edward, who was helping to water the plants, felt his heart stop for a moment. He exchanged a quick glance with Marlene, who nodded slightly. It was time. "Girls," he called softly, sitting on the garden bench, "can we talk for a little bit?" Leah and Sophie approached, their little faces dirty with soil, showing an apprehension that children so young shouldn't know. They sat down, one on each side of him, as they had become accustomed to doing. "It's about Mommy, isn't it?" Leah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You found out where she is." Edward took a deep breath, seeking strength. "Yes, my love. We found out." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The police found evidence that your mother didn't manage to escape that night." "She died," Sophie said simply, her voice strangely calm. "Like we already knew." Edward felt tears form in his eyes. "Yes, honey, I'm so sorry, so very sorry." Leah began to cry silently, large tears running down her face. But it was her next question that broke everyone's heart. "Did she suffer?" "No," replied Edward firmly, pulling her closer. "It was quick. She was thinking about you until the last moment. They found a note from her, you know. It said that you are stronger than winter." "Like the jasmine flowers," Sophie whispered, looking at the seedlings they had planted. "Exactly like the jasmine flowers," Edward agreed. They remained silent, For a long time, just sitting there in the garden, the girls nestled against Edward as they processed the confirmation of something they already knew, deep down. The perfume of the first jasmine flowers floated around them like an invisible embrace. "Can we do something special?" Leah asked finally, her voice small but determined. "To say goodbye to her properly? What would you like to do?" The girls exchanged glances, years of silent communication passing between them in a single look. "Mommy loved butterflies," Sophie said. "She said they were messengers from heaven." Thus was born the idea of the memorial. During the following week, everyone was involved in the preparations. Marlene researched and brought seeds of flowers that attract butterflies. Ivana helped the girls write letters to their mother, which would be buried next to the new seedlings. Edward hired an artist to create a small bronze sculpture of butterflies, which would be placed in the center of the garden. On the day chosen for the ceremony, the sky dawned extraordinarily blue. The girls wore the dresses that Marlene had sewn, especially for the occasion. Light blue, as Helena liked, with small butterflies embroidered on the hem. The ceremony was intimate and emotional. Only the family was present. Edward, the girls, Marlene, Ivana, and even Dr. Paul, who'd become an important part of that improbable family unit. Leah and Sophie, each holding a flower seedling, approached the chosen spot in the garden. The butterfly sculpture was already installed, its bronze wings shining in the morning sun. "Dear Mommy," began Leah, her voice trembling slightly as she read the letter they had written. "Together. Today we are planting these flowers for you. They are special flowers which will bring butterflies to our garden, so you will always have messengers to send your love to us." Sophie continued, "Thank you for being so brave, for trying to protect us, for loving us so much. I promise I won't feel guilty anymore for not being able to help you. Ivana said it wasn't my responsibility, that I was just a child. And now we have a new family," added Leah. "Edward, Marlene, all of them. They love us like you loved, different but just as strong." "But we will never forget you," Sophie completed. "You will always be here, in our heart, in the perfume of the jasmine, in the flight of the butterflies." As the girls planted the seedlings, Edward felt a soft breeze caress his face. For a moment, he had the impression of smelling a familiar perfume, jasmine mixed with something else, something that reminded him of love and longing. That night, after putting the girls to bed, they had insisted on sleeping with the curtains open so that the moonlight would illuminate the newly planted flowers. Edward found Marlene in the kitchen, preparing tea. "They are extraordinary," said the housekeeper, her hands busy with the cups. "Helena would be proud." "She is," Edward replied softly. "In some way, she is seeing all this." A soft noise made them look at the door. Leah was there, barefoot in her new pajamas. "Can't sleep?" Edward asked, already getting up to go to her, but Leah just smiled, a small but real smile. "I just came to say good night again." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "Dad." Edward felt his heart stop. It was the first time one of the girls had called him that. Before he could respond, Leah had already run back to the room, leaving behind only the echo of that precious word. Marlene discreetly wiped away a tear. "I think we have one more thing to celebrate today." Edward nodded, unable to speak through the lump in his throat. Outside in the moonlit garden, the jasmine flowers continued to perfume the night, like a silent blessing from Helena for this family that had flourished from the most improbable soil. Summer arrived, bringing with it a wave of changes. The garden was now full of flowers, butterflies danced among the jasmines, and the girls' laughter echoed more frequently through the halls of the mansion. But the greatest transformation was not in the environment, but in the hearts that lived there. On a particularly hot morning, while Edward was working in his office, he heard a commotion coming from the garden. As he approached the window, he saw a scene that took his breath away. Sophie was standing alone, almost 7 feet away from Leah. It was the first time since he had met them that he had seen them voluntarily separate from each other. Marlene was nearby, silent tears running down her face, while Ivana watched with an emotional smile. "You can do it!" Leah shouted, stretching out her arms. "Come on, Sophie!" With hesitant but determined steps, Sophie crossed the distance that separated her from her sister. When they finally reunited in a hug, everyone present applauded. Edward ran down the stairs, arriving in the garden in time to see the girls repeating the exercise, this time with more confidence. "They asked to try," Ivana explained softly. "They said their mother always said they were strong enough for anything." "But isn't it dangerous?" Edward asked, concerned. "Not physically," the psychologist replied. "Their condition allows this type of movement. What kept them together was fear, not physical need." That small achievement seemed to open the doors to others. The following week, during breakfast, Sophie made an announcement that caught everyone by surprise. "We want to go to school." Edward almost choked on his coffee. The girls had never attended a regular school, first because of Tony's neglect, then because of their own insecurity. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "You don't need to do this if you're not ready." "Mommy wanted us to study," Leah said. "It's in her diaries. She dreamed of seeing us in a real school." Edward exchanged glances with Marlene and then with Ivana, who was also present. The psychologist nodded slightly. "We can start slowly," she suggested. "Maybe with private lessons here at home first, for you to get used to the study routine." But the girls had other plans. "We want to go to a real school," Sophie insisted, "with other children, like in the books Marlene reads to us." That's how a new journey began. Edward, with Dr. Paul's help, researched all the schools in the region, looking for one that was prepared to receive the girls with sensitivity and understanding. They found New Dawn School, a small and welcoming institution known for its inclusive approach. The principal, Mrs. Thompson, was a grey-haired lady with a gentle smile that vaguely resembled Marlene. "Each child is unique," she said during the first visit. "Here we celebrate those differences." The girls were delighted with the school. The library full of colourful books, the playground with swings and slides, the music room with various instruments, everything seemed to have come directly from their dreams. But it was the school's small garden that really won their hearts. "Look, Dad," Leah called, pointing excitedly. "They have jasmine too." Edward felt his heart swell with love. Since that first time, the girls had begun to call him Dad more often, each time sounding more natural, more true. The preparation for the first day of school was a mixture of anxiety and excitement. Marlene sewed specially adapted uniforms for them. Ivana worked intensively to prepare them emotionally and socially. Edward spent sleepless nights, worried about every little detail. On the morning of the big day, the girls woke up before sunrise. They put on their new uniforms with reverent care, let Marlene arrange their hair in identical braids, and ate breakfast without complaining, something unheard of. Before leaving, however, they insisted on making a stop in the garden. They knelt near the butterfly sculpture, where the flowers they had planted in memory of Helena now bloomed abundantly. "Good morning, Mommy," whispered Leah. "Today is our first day of school." "You would be proud," added Sophie. "We're being strong, like you always said we were." Edward watched the scene a few steps behind, silent tears running down his face. Marlene, at his side, held his hand in silent support. On the way to school, the girls alternated between excitement and nervousness. They hummed the songs they had learned with Marlene, then fell silent, squeezing each other's hands. "What if the other kids don't like us?" Leah asked softly when they were almost there. "Then they will miss the chance to meet two wonderful girls," Edward replied firmly. At the school gate, they were greeted by Mrs. Thompson and Teacher Anne, a young woman with a warm smile who would be responsible for their class. "Welcome to our family," said Mrs. Thompson, kneeling down to be at the girl's height. Edward also crouched down, hugging his daughters one last time before letting them in. "Remember, you are stronger than winter. Like the jasmine flowers," completed Sophie, smiling bravely. As he watched them enter the school, holding hands but with firm steps, Edward felt a mixture of pride and gratitude so intense that he could barely breathe. These girls, who had arrived in his life so broken and scared, were flourishing before his eyes. "Helena would be proud," said Marlene softly, "of all of you." And at that moment, as a gentle breeze carried the perfume of jasmine through the air, Edward could have sworn he felt a loving presence around him, as if Helena really was there, blessing this new chapter in her daughters' lives. The first school semester passed like a dream. The girls, to everyone's surprise and joy, adapted to the school routine with an ease that no one expected. Their notebooks were soon filled with golden stars and complimentary comments from the teachers. "They have an impressive thirst for learning," commented teacher Anne during a parent meeting, "and a unique way of helping each other. When one has difficulty, the other immediately notices and helps, even without words." The friendships, which they had feared so much in the beginning, began to blossom naturally. Soon, the mansion began to receive visits from curious classmates and their apprehensive mothers, who invariably left charmed by the girls' sweetness. One particularly meaningful afternoon, Edward was in his office when he heard something that made his heart stop. Laughter. Not the restrained laughter he already knew, but true belly laughs, the kind that come straight from the soul. Approaching the window, he saw Leah and Sophie in the garden with two classmates from school, all covered in dirt, planting new flowers under Marlene's supervision. The girls were teaching their friends how to care for the plants, naturally reproducing the lessons they had learned. "You have to be patient," Sophie explained seriously. "Mommy always said that flowers are like people. They need time to grow." "And love," added Leah. "Lots of love." That night during dinner, the girls made an announcement that caught everyone by surprise. "We want to have a party," said Sophie. "A party?" Edward asked, exchanging surprised glances with Marlene. "A birthday party," Leah explained. "Not our actual birthday, but for the day you found us, Dad." Edward felt his throat tighten with emotion. It had been exactly 1 year since that fateful morning in front of the auto shop. "I think it's a wonderful idea," said Marlene, her eyes shining with restrained tears. The party was planned with all the love in the world. The girls insisted on participating in every detail, from choosing the cake, chocolate with strawberries like Helena used to make, to the decorations, jasmine flowers everywhere. The big day dawned sunny and perfect. The garden was magnificent, with tables arranged among the flower beds. The butterflies, as if understanding the importance of the occasion, danced among the flowers in greater numbers than usual. The guests began to arrive. The classmates from school with their parents, Mrs. Thompson, teacher Anne, Dr. Paul and his wife Ivana, and even Mrs. Davis, who was now a frequent and cherished visitor. At one point during the party, Edward gathered everyone for a brief speech, but before he could begin, Sophie asked to speak. "We prepared something," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. The girls positioned themselves in the center of the garden, near the butterfly sculpture. Leah held a paper decorated with hand-drawn flowers. "Dear Dad," she began to read, her voice clear and firm. "Today is 1 year since you saved us, but it wasn't just that day. You keep saving us every day," Sophie continued. "When we arrived here, we were very scared. We didn't know that there could be a house without shouting, a family without hurting, a love without fear." "Mommy taught us to be strong," Leah resumed, "but you taught us that we don't need to be strong alone. And Marlene showed us that we can have more than one mother in our heart." added Sophie, making the housekeeper cover her face with her hands, moved. That's why, they continued together, we want to give you a special gift. They made a sign, and Marlene brought a carefully wrapped package. Edward opened it with trembling hands. It was an album, richly decorated with dried flowers and butterflies. It's our new family album, Leah explained. It has old photos of Mommy that we want you to know. And new photos, Sophie completed, of our family now. Because we learned that love doesn't divide. It multiplies. Edward could barely see the photos through his tears. There were recorded all the moments of the past year. The first time the girls smiled for real, the beginning of the garden, the sessions with Ivana, the first day of school, moments with Marlene in the kitchen, afternoons of study with teacher Anne. The last page contained a surprise, an official document already signed by the judge. It was the final adoption, finally approved after months of process. Now it's official, said Dr. Paul, smiling. You are legally a family. The girls ran to hug Edward, who wrapped them in his arms, as he had done so many times that year. But this time it was different. There was no fear. There were no reservations. It was a hug from people who knew exactly where they belonged. Look, someone shouted suddenly, a blue butterfly. Everyone turned to see a magnificent butterfly with sky-blue wings perched on the bronze sculpture. It was a rare species which no one had seen before in the garden. Mommy's favorite color, whispered Leah, marveling. The butterfly took flight lazily, circled the group once, and then rose, until it disappeared into the blue summer sky. That night, long after the guests had left and the girls slept peacefully in their room, Edward sat in the garden. The perfume of jasmine was particularly intense, and the full moon bathed everything with its silver light. Thank you, Helena, he whispered to the night, for having been so brave, for having fought so hard. I promise that your flowers will always have love, will always have a garden to bloom. A gentle breeze stirred the flowers, carrying with it a perfume that reminded him of love, longing, and gratitude. In their room, Leah and Sophie slept embraced, soft smiles on their faces, no longer the restrained smiles of those who fear the next storm, but the serene smiles of those who know they are home. And so, under the starry sky of that summer night, a story that began with screams and tears ended with love and flowers, because sometimes the most beautiful families are born not from blood, but from the choices we make with our heart, and because some flowers, like true love, are truly stronger than winter.